Our next guest is Dr. David Van Gent, a GP from Toowoomba, a university lecturer and spokesperson for the No campaign during the same-sex marriage debate, during which he also wrote and published a book, Stealing from a Child. He has now written a terrific piece in this week's Spectator Australia. Conscience Rules OK is the title, and it's about the hot topic, yes, Israel Folau, religious freedom and free speech. So David, welcome to Outsiders. How are you?
Thank you, Rowan. Lovely to be here. Sorry to hear that Venezuela is giving you so much trouble, Rita. And, James, good to see you.
Now, David, so tell me, we'll get into the article. What message are you keen to give the Morrison government with this article in the Spectator Australia?
I'm sure they're all reading it this very morning.
Of course they are now.
Look, I think that the theme is common to this show, that religious and conscientious freedom is meaningless unless we first break the shackles on free speech. And so I'd be saying to the Morrison government, if I had that privilege, pretty much the same as that great poet John Milton said to the British government about 400 years ago, when they were having their own crisis with free speech and freedom of religion. And John Milton said to the British Parliament, "Give me the liberty to argue freely according to conscience, above all liberties."
So
and
conscience,
I think we'd say to our Parliament, I'd say to our Parliament, give us back the liberty to argue freely according to conscience, because that liberty has been progressively taken away from us by government agencies, by your human rights commissions, your anti-discrimination tribunals, even your various regulatory bodies with their codes of conduct.
So David,
always it's intended to intimidate.
So David, you argue in the piece that freedom of religion, which we're hearing a lot about because of the Israel Folau case, obviously, free speech, which we heard a lot about with the Bill leak and the QU2 students up your way there, you're saying they are both subsets to freedom of conscience, that freedom of conscience is the umbrella under which all these other issues sit. So talk us through that very clearly, because I want to fully understand the difference between freedom of conscience and religious freedom or free speech.
Yeah, well, freedom of conscience and freedom of religion, they're essentially both part of that same moral effort, if you like, that is characteristic of humans, to try and understand what is true, what is just, what is unjust, what is good, and to live accordingly. So some people will reach a religious conclusion about what's the right way to live. Other people will reach a non-religious conclusion, but they are both deep, conscientious efforts. And you can't have laws that protect religious conscience, but not agnostic conscience. It is all part of the same struggle. And so Mr. Morrison must at least broaden his bill to be a conscientious and religious freedom bill. So it covers all of us.
So David, if I'm understanding you correctly, essentially what you're saying is you're describing the project of Western liberalism, this idea that freedom of conscience takes primacy over all, and many of the people who were big arguers for liberalism were actually atheists or not really religious in the past, but now we've gotten to this point where it's become turned around, and now they're saying, well, actually, the true liberal value is not conscience, but inclusion is what they say, and they use that to attack people's freedom of conscience if they don't come to the right conclusions. Would you say that then what we've got now is a situation where this liberal project has lost its way and we need to use legislation then to help it find its way back onto the path where conscience is reigning supreme again?
Yeah, we're forgetting the roots of our culture. This notion of individual conscience being supreme is a specifically Christian idea. It comes from this strange idea in our culture that the individual soul facing the universe, this is the essential drama of humanity. And that's not typical of humanity. Mostly we're tribes, we're collectives, and even in, we've still got that great communist state to our north. That's the normal default position. The beauty of Western civilization is it raises the individual and their conscience and their liberty to live according to what they judge to be true and good. That's supreme. And now with group identity politics, it's destroying the individual conscience and making it a competition between the self-interest of different groups. That is a terrible backward step into the old tribalism and collectivism of the old way. So yes, it's a very important cultural watershed.
Well, take the Israel Folau argument. Now, he's essentially being persecuted, sacked for stating his religiously held beliefs. Now, you argue that even if they weren't religiously held beliefs, he shouldn't be sacked. But isn't that then crossing a line into discrimination? If you think that gays are destined for hell, or atheists are destined for hell, whatever the category is, surely you have to have some sort of a religious belief system to justify sharing that. If you are, say, not particularly religious, why is it okay to be discriminating on any level against any group of people, whether they be atheists or homosexuals or fornicators?
I think you've just touched on the point that even though he may have these ideas and beliefs, it doesn't mean he's discriminating against anybody. That was the finding of the High Court in Britain about Felix Ngole last week. He might have these beliefs from his faith, but it doesn't mean he's discriminating against anyone. So those are separate. But even more important, of course, if someone like Izzy is talking about hell and other categories, he's talking religious talk. But I have agnostic friends, for example, who are passionately opposed to the imposition of the safe schools ideology on their children. They're not religious people. They just judge that this is wrong, this is weird, this is corrupting my child's mind. And they need the conscientious objection liberty to take their child away from that situation. And likewise, I wrote that whole book against same-sex marriage without a single religious argument, because it's not. It's about the justice to children of letting them have their mother and father where possible, not taking that away in law by creating this institution of motherless families.
Now, David,
there's a whole book about it. So
you had with your book, just very briefly, just tell us what happened with the printing or publication of your book at one point.
That's right. On the eve of the book launch, which went around the whole country, the very night before, the printer for my publisher told us he wasn't actually going to supply the books. And he said the printer said it's because of the content matter and subject matter. And so I felt that was a bit of sabotage, really, I don't know. It didn't stop the book launch proceeding because we'd smelt a rat and got some other books printed just in case. But the point is this. I defended that company's right to discriminate against me on ideological grounds because they're a free company. They're not a government agency. They're free to do what they like. But I did say, wouldn't it be great in our society if the tolerance went both ways? So if a gay couple goes to a Christian baker who doesn't want to write a gay marriage slogan on a cake, why can't they just go down the road and find someone else? That would be tolerance going both ways. That would be something to celebrate. But it never happens like that. The imposition of government agencies and laws is always against the conservatives, always against the Christians.
Now, David, you mentioned the Felix Ngole case, which is fascinating. Only last week in the High Court, 3 High Court judges in Britain, this is, very, very similar case to Israel Folau, where Felix Ngole was suspended from the University of Sheffield, where he was a social worker, or doing a social worker course, because he had posted on his Facebook page some comments by Leviticus in the Old Testament, basically very similar to the Israel Folau situation, comments from Leviticus about homosexuality being an abomination or whatever it was. And he was suspended. He took it to the High Court. The High Court judges, and the point you just touched on, David, they came down on and they said very, very clearly that just because you hold views critical of X, Y, or Z does not mean you are discriminating against X, Y, or Z. Now, this is so critical because I believe, or I suspect, the Rugby Australia argument and the sponsors, etc., would be arguing that Israel Folau is discriminating against fornicators, as Rita said, homosexuals, etc., etc. But the argument from the High Court in Britain would be, no, he's not. He's entitled to hold those points of view, and that comes back to your argument about conscience. Do you see ramifications from the British case in the Israel Folau case?
Yeah, whether it's a religiously informed conscience or a secularly informed conscience, you know, maybe against issues like late-term abortion or euthanasia, people hold deeply, really sincere views about what they cannot support, what they cannot do. And in a good society, we'll simply respect that. We'll disagree with them, but we won't set government lawyers onto them, and we won't sack them for having a belief. If they do actively discriminate, that's a matter for the law. If they incite violence, that's a matter for the law. If they defame someone, it's a matter for the law. But other than that, let free speech and free conscience rip, because that is the lifeblood of a free society.
Fantastic. David Van Gent, love that. Let free speech rip. That's fantastic. Thanks, David, so much for coming on Outsiders, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much. Now,